heart of any organization, leadership drives culture, employee engagement, and creates a platform of where performance can thrive and results can be achieved. More now than ever before, the role of leadership has been reiterated yet again, and much is expected of leadership in a world that is constantly evolving. So let's hear from the best of the best on what this really means for business. Nicola, what are the critical leadership skills required today?
Thanks, Dee. So I think your intro was apt to say that leadership is ever more important now than it has ever been before. Organizations are going to need incredibly distinct leadership to not only survive, but really revive organizations and to navigate through the future, which is going to be so incredibly different for all of us. So if we look at leadership traits, the obvious are still important, there's no doubt. But I think that there's some new leadership traits that we have seen coming through this time of COVID that are going to stand organizations in good stead for the future. So if you think about things like emotional intelligence, obviously it's always been high up there in terms of importance from a leadership perspective. But if you think about the extreme pressure that people have found themselves in now with regards to physical, mental, emotional stress and anxiety, leaders are going to have to be hugely emotionally intelligent themselves to navigate this time with teams. Other things that we can speak about, candor. We've always said that leaders need to be honest, but I think there's a different level of honesty that's going to be needed here in the communication from leadership. Things cannot come across as ambiguous for people. People are in an anxiety state, and they'll continue to remain in that state for a period of time. And so I think very clear direction, very clear purpose for people, and a lot of candid honesty is going to go far for teams. Other things, the consistency of communication is key here. Again, communication always been a key leadership trait, but that consistent engagement with teams is going to be hugely important. Even if it becomes slightly repetitive, I think people are so bombarded with information that to stay on track in one direction and pull teams together when they're working incredibly virtually, we're going to need this consistent, clear, factually based communication coming through quite strongly from leaders. Empathy is a huge skill that we've seen coming through in this time. Leaders that have been able to navigate and hold teams quite profoundly together and keeping them in a high performance environment. There has to be a lot of empathy that has come through. It's not just around driving performance. It is truly an understanding of where people are at, being able to meet them with all of the hardship that they may be experiencing through this time, and being able to show a level of emotional support for them in order to keep them productive in their spaces. A new one, I think, is around managing hybrid teams. Organizations have spoken for a long time around flexibility and work-life balance and integration. We've now all been forced into this world, and we've leapfrogged all of those concepts, and we're going to be designing for a future world of work that not any of us have necessarily operated in. And managing hybrid teams is going to take different skill from all of us. Things like coordination, true project management, an ability to manage change is no longer going to be an HR function. It is a leadership function, and it's a skill that leaders are going to have to craft quite quickly. And finally, things like flexibility and adaptability. I mean, the only thing that will be constant in this future world of work is change. And so how agile are leaders going to be within themselves and their own type of skill? Can they acknowledge that that decision I made yesterday wasn't the right one for us? Can we readjust and can we go in a slightly different direction? So I'm hoping I've touched on just some that aren't the common leadership capabilities and skills that we've seen in the past, just to highlight new skills that we're going to have to see coming through.
Nicola, those were fantastic insights. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Certainly you touched on having a clear vision and purpose, and I think that's so paramount in this day and age, especially where people need clarity around expectations and role clarity, because there's just so much of confusion.
Absolutely.
It's just getting even more and more complex with the COVID-19 pandemic. What are your thoughts on generosity? Do you think
in terms of what? Generosity of spirit?
Yeah. So, for example, allowing employees to make mistakes, as an example, allowing them to try new things.
Sure. Listen, I'm not sure it's necessarily generosity specifically, but absolutely, I think we have to have space for people to reinvent themselves a little bit here as well. So, as much as leaders are going to be learning new skills, other people in all of the teams are going to be learning new skills. So, I suppose it is a generosity of spirit a little bit in terms of being able to be far more supportive and give people space. Um, and I think it is also generosity in terms of the emotional capacity that you can bring to teams. I think it's going to be key. Yeah, absolutely. People are going to battle through this, to be quite honest, and none of us have the absolute answers. No one has been into this new world that we are all entering into. So I think if you can craft a learning organization and a learning team where it's okay for trial and error, it's okay to adapt, it's okay to change and re-navigate the direction. So I think that agility in teams is going to be incredibly useful because I think we're navigating something brand new.
Certainly agree with you. And, I also think that element on emotional intelligence is needed and empathy is needed now more than ever before. Nicola, thank you so much for sharing those wonderful insights with us. Jasmine, what role do we play as HR in leadership?
Morning, Darusha. Thank you for having me. And let me just preface by saying, and Nicholas touched on it, we're a learning organization. It's a learning mindset that we have these days. So certainly no experts, but we learn as we go along. And there's something that has stuck with me through the years. Eleanor Roosevelt said that none of us will live long enough to make all of the mistakes, which is why we need to learn from each other. So I thought I'd just preface with that. Human resources is actually quite uniquely positioned to propel forward the ambitions of an organization through people priorities. And when these are actualized, it actually actualizes the trajectory or the aspirations of the business. And we've seen the evolution of human resources from reactive to proactive to predictive solutions, where we set the new standards for HR leadership, and that in itself or in turn impacts how we empower leaders for future fit. And this is where we see the convergence of data, artificial intelligence, and cloud as enablers. Nicola also touched on empathy, which is part of what I wanted to talk about in respect of HR's transformation and contribution to leadership development. When we look at the role of the manager or the leader, it's changed significantly over the years, where we're now looking for them to have empathy, understanding, helping bridge and build competency. So those abilities or behaviors that are needed versus many years ago are quite different. So this is where the partnership with HR comes in terms of leveraging, supporting, and having the right conversations and looking through the right lens with those managers and leaders, so that we're again contributing to future fit and leadership development.
Jasmine, thank you for sharing those insights. All extremely relevant points, also echoing what Nicola has mentioned. I guess also having a clear understanding of the organizational mandate. What are your thoughts on that, Jasmine? Understanding what the organizational mandate is in terms of the strategy, and then aligning or empowering our leaders to show up in a way that actually aligns to achieving those objectives in terms of the organizational strategy or mandate. What are your thoughts on that?
So I would say it's critical because we don't exist to serve ourselves. We exist to serve something bigger, a purpose, an aspiration, a plan that obviously translates into strategy. And one of the things that we focus on in our organization, which I imagine is something that can be translated across all organizations, is creating clarity. You have to have clarity on what the end goal is, the aspiration is, because when you translate that to your particular function or to you as an individual, in order to actualize something, it's got to link to the bigger picture. So if we're planning to serve something that is isolated, it actually doesn't make sense. It then has an impact in terms of employee individual fulfillment, impact on business from a continuity perspective, and. So it's the most important element to start, I think.
Well, that's incredible, Jasmine. I love that you say We don't exist to serve ourselves, because I guess as leadership, our role is just so much more than ourselves, right? I mean, people depend on leaders. Leaders have such a big influence on organizations, and they have the power to change and to influence. Yeah, I think if there's a biggest takeaway from the session is we don't exist to serve ourselves. That sounds really incredible. Thank you so much for sharing these fantastic insights with us, Jasmine. Marge, what would you say are the benefits of effective leadership?
Thanks, Dorisha. I think the benefits of effective leadership are quite visible and clear and very tangible when you see an organization that works together, particularly in a situation of crisis management, how leadership gets around the room, around the table, organizes respective individuals to be able to adapt and change and respond to the crisis management situation in question. So the benefits are certainly there, because then you also get to see people become highly engaged, innovative ideas come through because people feel safe in the environment due to the effective leadership skills. You also find people are more engaged in as far as what they're doing in their careers, if you are client facing, in the servicing of those respective clients, and also in finding solutions, whether it's internal solutions or external solutions. You really then see how effective leadership steps up, particularly in a point where things are not going well, given the current market situation that we're in, given the current pandemic that we're all faced with. It's really around a test of effective leadership is around how leadership has been able to quickly adapt, quickly align functions, align staff complement to be able to continue to work and become as productive as possible in spite of the circumstances of having been forced to work from home. Whether or not any organization was ready for it, it has happened. So those are really the fruits and the benefits of effective leadership. The ability to adapt and change and to lead in the change stems to be very good examples of how effective leadership, one can actually see the tangible benefits of having an effective leadership team. It also talks to the emotional intelligence of leadership. It talks to leadership invested in also ensuring that there is a pipeline of future leadership, so that the legacies can continue to take place, so that individuals continue to be engaged, so that individuals also feel vested to the very solutions that the organization has to provide for its clients, and the services that also need to be provided.
My question to you, Marge, is this aspect of developing a pipeline of future leadership is so critically important for organization. And I don't believe that organizations are very well prepared in terms of that. What are your thoughts and insights around this very critical topic of leadership development?
Thanks, Dorisha. It is quite a critical conversation to have, and I know most times in the human capital space, I think for us as human capital specialists, we put the conversation and the agenda onto the table, but it's really not our sole responsibility to ensure that there is leadership capability, that certainly there is future leadership capability that's built into the organization. So it's very important that we place the agenda on the table. It is equally important that the leadership within the organization has to own the subject and the topic of building leadership pipeline, purely also from a legacy point of view, to ensure that business operations, and to also ensure continued sustainable business continuity, that there is a pipeline of leadership. So it is a critical topic. And it is a topic that has to be jointly held with human capital as well as business leaders, certainly to ensure from a shareholder point of view that there will be business continuity. So that's why it is a critical conversation that we need to drive as human capital, but it has to be owned by the business leaders themselves.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Marge. Kalani,
Dorisha, could I come in here, if I may?
Yes, please do. I was just about to ask.
We've lost Dorisha again, so Jasmine, I'm assuming go for it.
Okay, So I just wanted to pick up on that, Marge. It's fantastic feedback. And, you know, one of the evolutions we've seen in the people space is that being a leader has got less to do with being in a leadership role, but being a leader in the role that you're in. So when we talk about leadership development, we're focusing on the behaviors in every part of the organization. Because if we truly commit to a growth mindset and the fact that, you know, potential is nurtured and not predetermined, it gives us the opportunity to develop and pull leadership capability from different parts of the organization and not necessarily one group of individuals or tagged by your job level. I think this is where we've made major shifts.
I'm going to add there as well while we're waiting to go back to studio, but I want to add that careers, I agree with you, Jasmine, you know, that careers used to be this linear thing and people used to climb this corporate ladder. And lots of people are speaking to learning paths versus career paths. And where are the learning opportunities for you in your next role? And where's the growth for you? So I love that thinking around influence doesn't come from a job title. It doesn't come from where you are within hierarchy. It comes from your thought leadership, your ability to take teams along a journey. And how can you nurture that more broadly across organizations? Because I think what it will also bring in time for organizations is diversity of thought. You know, if we look at the traditional hierarchy and the people who are predominantly in leadership roles, maybe they've grown up together, maybe they're a certain generation. And I think to allow leadership to take place more broadly across the organization, it'll bring very different generations together. It'll bring very different thought processes. And I think what that will do is it'll enable South African organizations to really compete. Because I think organizations are going to compete on their ability to think incredibly differently and be innovative and keep a step ahead. And so I love that notion of leadership is going to come from across organizations versus just this linear view of, you know, one role following another.
And I also think, my colleagues, it's so important that the focus on leadership, to your point, Nicola and Jasmine, it's not only the top, we're not only talking about the top leadership team, we're talking about developing that pipeline across our various levels within the organization, because it is the breadth and the depth of that journey of learning across levels that you then get to develop and inculcate the leadership skills, and you inculcate the right behaviors that you'd want to see even at the very top levels. So the nurturing has to really take place far earlier on than just to focus at the last sort of top corner office sort of division and areas. So I do think it's so important, so critically important now more than ever that we are developing those skill sets from the onset and from earlier on in the careers of individuals.
Yeah, this really makes for
such... I think I'm agreeing with you ladies here. I think one of the biggest challenges that we often face here is crisis management, in the sense that everything is wanted yesterday. So probably there is no much time that is set aside to train or develop other people to an extent that you get to poach from other companies more than want to grow your own timber. You get a situation where people look for a certain skill that they could easily have grown over time had they managed their company better than just crisis management. Always everything is in a rush, and we don't give enough time to train our own people. So the question probably that comes maybe from that is to say, whose responsibility is that? Is it HR or is it the leaders themselves? Are you expecting somebody that you have given targets, that who wants to manage those targets, to worry about training for the future that he might not even be there himself? I don't know. What do you think, ladies?
So let me come in there, because this is a topic that is so close to my heart, and I think you're touching on skills development. There's jobs that, so individuals that are being born today will be in jobs that actually don't even exist, right? So skills development is not HR's job, the business job, or Microsoft's job, or Alexander Forbes' job. It's all our jobs. So from that perspective, we look at a country perspective, and the thinking that we need to be taking individuals from our competitors, that has to change, right? Our obligation is to build skills for this country from an economic perspective as well. And obviously that links into your organizational goals. But to your question, which is $1 million question, it's everybody's role. Skills development is everybody's role. You can't have a skills discussion without looking at the landscape and the macro factors. And I was saying that, you know, individuals that are born right now in this time will be employed in jobs that we haven't even named yet, jobs that don't exist, jobs that we don't even know. So if we don't get our heads and our commitment around skills development as a collective country, so we need to not think of this in isolation of an HR skill or a Microsoft skill or an Investec skill. It's got to be about skills for South Africa. And when we think that way, we then let go of the thinking of, you know, I've got to hire or take from compete. Because when we do that, we're essentially shuffling this group of individuals that have had access to opportunity and role, and we're not making an impact where it counts from a skills development perspective. So that's from a macro perspective. If I change it very quickly and bring it in internally, the role or the accountability for skills development in an organization is every single person. It's about people first. So whilst all of us are in different industries, you know, whether you're developing new cloud technology or new financial offerings or whatever the case may be, at some point, the impact of that will be diminished if we don't focus on people and skills first. So it's not an add-on, it is the priority as I view it.
Jasmine, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing those insights with us again. I think, Kulani, you were onto something as well, but we didn't get what you were saying. Do you want to repeat yourself?
I was about to talk about the challenges of leadership, or the challenges leadership face. Maybe in going into that, I was just going to say there is this great expectation by all of us to expect that leaders will know everything and know what to do. This is a crisis that we are in right now that has never happened. There's no case study. And maybe the pressure that the leaders might have is that everybody is expecting them to know the answer and to know how to deal with that. And leaders themselves find themselves in having to make difficult decisions in trying to save businesses. And it's almost, it shouldn't be, but it almost looks like it's a battle between business versus people, where you have to make difficult decisions, and whether it's retrenchment, whether it's to scaling down, and all those things. But for me, what is very critical, whether it's for this crisis or for any other crisis that is going to come in future, there are two biggest challenges that I'm just going to be politically incorrect if I have to be, and just address those two. I mean, one of the challenges that leaders face today is this notion of good leadership versus winning at all cost. I think the world, or all of us, have been so unfair to the leaders, in the sense that when we say a leader is successful, we simply say they have turned around the business. In other words, the business is now making money. So the measure has come to be money, to an extent that leaders are challenged to do anything possible to make that money. Even if it means we need to be challenging the ethical leadership, the moral leadership, getting into scandals and deals and tenders. I didn't say tenders are wrong, but getting into anything in business so that we can achieve this. So for us, if a leader has not turned around and has not made the billions, we don't consider that to be a leader. And for me, I think that is the greatest challenge, that to say the shareholders and all the other stakeholders have their expectation on the money thing, and politics on the other side, and all those things. And yet, in my view, that should not be the only measure that we need to use to say a leader is successful. The second one, which is equally important for me, is also emanating from that, because now it makes leaders think about here and now. You are only worried about this quarter, you are only worried about the dividends for this phase, to an extent that leaders now lack foresight. I'm very passionate about foresight, and I'm very passionate about being proactive. There are things that we could prevent if leadership could think bigger than here and now. I am saying, I mean, in the 4IR space, in all the things that are coming in, we simply saying there are things that we could be doing better. We already know that future cars are going to be driverless. So what does it mean to me as a leader now? If I'm running an insurance company that depends mainly on accidents and stuff like that, how do I start thinking about the call center agent that is working for me? So for me, leadership is going beyond the call of duty. And if as a leader, after doing all these things, I am not able, I repeat, I am not able to produce better leaders than myself. I am not able to put a foundation for a better country or for the better future. Then I am not doing anything. So for me, those are the two directions that I want to talk about. To say we are challenging them to win at all costs, and ultimately they end up being forced to do things that are not right, and they lack foresight. That's for me is the biggest thing, to say they have to think, yes, you have to worry about here and now, but had we prepared for a lot of other things, we will not have issues. Look at the companies that were already ready for working from home. A number of companies already had flexi working policies, and others had to react. And you see the problem when you react, the next thing you do is retrench, because you're not thinking ahead. And so if the fish rots from the head, if there is no foresight on leadership, the country, the company, and even the family is messed up.
Kolani, I can see you're so passionate about this topic. We really do have an incredible team of HR experts here. This topic, this discussion is so amazingly enriching. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And Kolani, you really raised a brilliant point about leaders being placed in situations where they feel very challenged as well. You know, there's such a focus on driving profits as opposed to, purpose. There's such a big expectation of leaders, that so much so that they're so focused on sales and targets that actually gets to be experienced by employees, and adds to a whole lot of things. I mean, later on today, we will be talking a bit more on employee well-being, but you've raised some really incredible, valid points. Thank you so much for sharing those insights with us. And Kolani, I'm putting you back into the hot spot because it's your turn now for your question. Kolani, what challenges are leaders facing in this current economic climate?
Okay, all right. I thought that I was talking more onto that to say the leaders, there's that expectation to perform magic on an unknown territory that they are not aware of, and probably Machi will want to speak more of that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kolani. Yes, I just wanted to add, I think you made such critical, bold statements, thanks to you. But I just wanted to say, I was listening on very carefully as to what you were saying. And in all that you were saying, I was seeing myself and how I need to contribute in that conversation around leadership. So as a human capital specialist, my understanding and my sense of responsibility is that I wouldn't impart all of the responsibility on leadership, but I see my role being there to partner with business when decisions do need to be made about revenue and profits and where we are heading with revenue and profits, but to be there also to make sure that I center and I also equally focus the discussion around the people element and the impact that may come from such decisions. Just always making sure that the conversation around people being important, that around those boardroom conversations, the people agenda is equally top of the list in that conversation.
Marge, I think you've summed it
Could I come in here?
really well. Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think just to preface, and the points are so valid, but I think the point to preface is that we do need profitable organizations for business continuity. From a macro perspective, this helps the economy of the country. So that's the first piece. The second piece is we need responsible leadership to accompany that. And Marge touched on a bit of what I wanted to talk about was the culture piece, which talks to all the behaviors Connie was referring to earlier. And if we look at some of the challenges that leaders are facing in the current market climate, it is exactly that. Business continuity and leading and managing through change. Very different what we're experiencing at the moment. So even your risk mitigation, your business plans, your solutions, your offerings, so many things have been impacted. So there's quite a bit of change that leaders have to get their heads around in a very compacted period of time. And the other piece that I want to add to this, which goes to the first question that was posed to Nicola as well, was the empathy and the emotional intelligence piece, because it's not just about running your business anymore or running a successful role with impact, but it's making sure that you do it in the right way from a diversity perspective. When I say diversity, I'm not talking about race and gender specifically. I'm talking about diverse behaviors, inclusive behaviors that create the right environment for employees to be their best selves. And this talks to how those behaviors are then translated into how leadership manifests on the ground, which is responsible leadership, ethical leadership, leadership that builds capability and skill. So we need to, I suppose, from an HR perspective as well, support our business leaders as we're navigating through very, very uncharted times, which I foresee more to come.
I agree. And I want to add, I don't think stakeholders are just looking for short-term profitability either. I think stakeholders are starting to review companies and shares in companies in a very different light. And if I look at what we report on these days, it's not just the financial aspects of the business. To your point, Jasmine, it is around sustainability. It is around impact on environment. It is around building future-fit organizations that are going to give longer-term growth than just short-term wins. Which I think does put leaders in a very different space to think about future growth versus just short-term profitability, which is probably a better thing for all of us, and I think to Marge's point around being able to raise the conversations, I think some of the conversations that we hold up in this context would be, are we going for short-term cost reduction, but what does it mean from a longer-term perspective, etc.
Okay.
Thank you. Kalani, go ahead.
No, it's okay. You can continue. I wanted to say, ultimately, with all the crisis and everything that happens, one of the things that I get worried about as a challenge for leaders is maybe lack of time for reflection. Because you are moving from one crisis to the next, and for me, that self-introspection, that time for reflection is important for leadership, because then you can look and say in hindsight, I could have learned this, then tomorrow when there's a crisis or there's a similar thing, you know how to deal with this. So I wish we could give space for leadership to have, or to encourage leaders to even have time for self-introspection and reflection, because there's no best teacher like hindsight. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kulani, the aspect of, going within yourself and conducting self-evaluation, which I think is so important. Very important insights shared. We've got about 10 minutes to go. We've been good on time so far. The next question focuses on how do you ensure impactful leadership, but I think we've actually covered quite a bit in terms of that already. We've probably answered a lot in terms of that. Is there any other insights that you'd like to share around being an impactful leader?
I want to add an obvious, if it's okay. But I think in times of uncertainty like we are now, I think we're also looking for charismatic leaders. I think people can have the most perfect strategies. I think that they can have every step outlined. But I think if we don't have leaders that can create a vision for people, and I know we spoke about linking to purpose, which is hugely important, but I'm saying that vision, that North Star that you're driving people towards with a lot of energy, with an emotional connection towards your organization, is going to be hugely important as well. I think people are going through slumps. So if you look at motivation levels, you're on a high a couple of weeks and then you're at a downer again. You're questioning your own performance. You're questioning, are you giving the right output? And I think that charismatic leadership, that leadership people can really connect to and really feel inspired by, we cannot forget. And it sounds such a simple truth for ourselves, but I think if we look at Jasmine's point around culture and the importance of culture and pulling together culture, if leadership is the management of culture, how do you do it in a virtual world? There are so many aspects around culture, but there's such an importance around charismatic leadership and creating a vision for people.
Definitely a very relevant point, Nicola. I think, when you talk about inspiration, that's absolutely needed, being able to actually create hope when people are feeling so hopeless, being able to actually exert a degree of influence, to have that drive and energy and still be able to remain authentic. So yeah, very, very valid points. Any other insights from the panel around impactful leadership, leading with significance, leaders that are trustworthy? Any thoughts or insights on those two topics? Go ahead, Marge.
Go first. Letchi.
Thanks.
And thanks for raising
Jasmine,
your hand.
I was going to give you the floor. I just wanted to add that, especially during the current uncertain times or in any instances of uncertainty, it's important that leaders are connecting with individuals. And I think that's where it's important, to your point, Nicola, that charismatic leaders are actually now being asked for more than ever, because that's how you kind of bring people out of that slump of whatever personal circumstances and situations and challenges that individuals are facing. I think it's so important right now that leaders have the sense of connectivity with individuals, apply the guiding principles of listening to what staff are saying, because it's in listening to what staff are saying that as a leader, you're not always expected to have the answers. So the answers may actually come from the very individuals themselves. The solutions may actually come from the very individuals themselves, just based on the ability of actively listening to what people are saying in those engagements. You can also see there's a direct link to profits in listening, because if you're then listening to your staff, but by the same token, you can then show clients that you're also listening to them. So it also serves such a greater purpose, instilling that listening ability internally, because then externally you can also show and also evidence that you're listening to client needs, what clients are saying, and then you can also tailor make the solution based on the your customer service based demands. So I do feel now more than ever the listening ability, the ability to connect, is becoming so much more of a requirement now more than ever.
Totally agree.
So you may not always have the answers, but you actually can be led to those answers through proper engagement and connecting with people. Wow, this has really been a very insightful, wonderful discussion. I'm going to do a wrap up. I don't know where to start. There's been such amazing insights from every one of you. It's really been phenomenal.